And dear ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to start the second day of our forum with an opening remarks from His Excellency former Australian Prime Minister, Mr. Tony Abbott. Prime Minister, the floor is yours.
Alexei, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honour to be here, and even though Australia is a faraway country, I am determined to take every chance I can to be here in Ukraine, show solidarity with the Ukrainian people and admiration for the Ukrainian armed forces, who have defeated the Russian Navy in the Black Sea without actually having a navy themselves, just one of the many ways in which Ukraine has amazed and impressed the entire world. Now, this is actually my fourth trip to Ukraine. The first was in 1982 in the company of an American of Ukrainian background. For him, coming to Ukraine for the first time in his life was an almost mystical experience. For me, it was an insight into the survival of Ukrainian nationhood and into the Ukrainian people's yearning to be free. Now, one of the hardest things for the citizens of a democracy to grasp is the mindset of a dictator. Of necessity, democratic leaders focus on getting elected. They deliver better schools, hospitals, roads and public transport. They build a stronger economy so that wages rise and taxes fall. They support the police so that citizens feel safe in their homes and their streets. By contrast, dictators don't have to worry about losing elections, so they can seek national glory and their place in history, especially when there's a messianic commitment to imperial or to religious dominion deep in their national cultures. Now, not long after a Russian missile battery shot down a civilian airliner over eastern Ukraine, killing 298 people, including 38 Australians, I had an exchange with Vladimir Putin that I'd earlier likened to a shirt front or rough tackle on the sports field. It went something like this. Because that missile battery must have had his permission to be in another country, I insisted that he, Putin, owed the families of the dead an apology, plus compensation. His retort, and this was back in 2014 during his first invasion of Ukraine, was that the plane was brought down by provocateurs, that Ukrainians were all fascists, and that Ukraine had no right to exist anyway. And when I added that I knew about Kievan Rus and had read Tolstoy and Solzhenitsyn, but that Ukraine had a right to be free, he repeated his slurs, only more forcefully. And then, as we were walking back into the conference that we were both attending at the time, he suddenly turned, grabbed both my elbows and said in English, "You are not a native Australian, but I am a native Russian," before trying to shove me away. I'm sure this extraordinary mini assault was meant as a warning to me, the citizen of a settler society, of my utter incapacity to grasp his blood and soil passion for every inch of Russian land as he saw it. So clearly, all of the Russian dictators' previous interventions in Georgia, in Armenia, plus that initial attack on Ukraine, were just incremental steps towards remedying the greatest geopolitical disaster of the 20th century as he saw it, namely the demise of the old Soviet Union. Because Putin's mission from God, as he sees it, is to recreate the Russia of Peter the Great. That's why Ukraine isn't just fighting for its own freedom. It's fighting for the freedom of all the countries that would be Putin's subsequent targets should he succeed here. Moldova, the rest of Georgia, the Stans, and ultimately the Baltic states and Poland. At the very least, the fall of Ukraine would mean a new Iron Curtain in Europe and a new Cold War standoff between two heavily armed camps, if not actual Russian hegemony over Eastern and Central Europe, based on a decadent West's inability to muster the resources and the will to keep its freedom. As Trotsky is supposed to have said, "You may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you." What's almost unthinkable to us is what's constantly on the minds of the dictators now on the march. We have to get used to the prospect of war if we are to avoid it, and make the changes that we find unpalatable, like military, industrial and cultural rearmament, resisting the allure of business as usual, sleepwalking through Lotus Land, because major war is now more likely than in 9 decades. Because it's not just Moscow that's geared up for war. Beijing burns to overcome its century of humiliation by seizing practically independent Taiwan on the way to resuming its destiny as the world's middle kingdom or global hegemon. As the commissars have told us countless times, that's their plan. And in convulsing the global order and deranging the economy, including the potential for nuclear escalation, an attack on Taiwan would be several orders of magnitude greater than the war here. Then there's Tehran, set on uniting the Muslim world under its brand of Islam and securing Islam's foretold triumph by laying waste to Israel and ultimately to the United States too. Why else would Tehran be desperate to acquire nuclear weapons? But as the mullahs have told us countless times, that's their plan. So Ukraine is but the first fight in a global struggle that we would prefer to avoid, but that the dictators are determined to have. One day, of course, they will be at each other's throats, as in the past, but for now, they're in a self-declared no-limits partnership with China's thirst for Russia's oil and gas, funding Putin's war machine, and Iranian drones part of the bombardment raining down nightly on Ukraine's cities. Between them, they are exploiting every vulnerability to shake the Pax Americana that's made the world more free, more fair, more safe, and more rich than ever, but that is the chief obstacle to their global ambitions. Now, no one votes with their feet to live in Russia, in China, or in the Middle Eastern theocracies, yet that's what this new arc of dictatorship wants, a world that's more like them, with people in thrall to the leader, to the party, or to a brutal version of Islam. That's what's at stake here in Ukraine, not just the right of Ukrainians to decide their future for themselves, but the right of all people everywhere to choose their own destiny rather than have it set for them by a president for life, a party state, or a perverted version of religion. This is not a struggle that can be abandoned just because it's hard, because it's much harder on the Ukrainians than it is on us. Our best hope of keeping the global peace is not to abandon today's struggle to prepare for tomorrow's. It's not to forget about Eastern Europe in order to worry about East Asia. It's not to put America first or Australia first, because it's not America or Australia that's currently most in trouble, but it will be if Ukraine falls. Because when barbarism triumphs anywhere, civilization is diminished everywhere. The most perfect welfare state and the best developed human rights protection and the most elaborate measures to get to net zero emissions are entirely useless if our trade is disrupted, our standard of living eroded, and our freedom coerced by newly ascendant hostile powers That's why Ukraine is the front line for freedom, and why this war should only end with the resounding lesson that aggression does not pay. The Russian tyrant needs to know that his bid to extinguish Ukraine does not pit 140 million Russians against just 35 million Ukrainians, but decency versus barbarity, and ultimately democracy versus dictatorship. Ukraine needs to be given all the weapons it needs, no longer enough not to lose, but finally enough to win, which means driving every last Russian soldier from every inch of Ukrainian territory. And if that is an unsurvivable humiliation for the Russian leader, then so be it. It means allowing Ukraine to mount the attacks on Russia's infrastructure and supply lines that Russia has constantly mounted against Ukraine. And if at some point the Ukrainians choose to bid for peace, it should be with the guarantee that Ukraine will henceforth be in NATO, so that Putin can't use any ceasefire as a pause to regroup and renew his assault. Now, at last, the US Congress has woken up to the folly of denying Ukraine the weapons it needs to help the world by helping itself. And the Europeans have finally given Ukraine access to some of the Russian wealth it deserves after all it's suffered. Yet it's embarrassing, even shameful, that Australia has not done more, especially after all the Ukrainians did in Petro Poroshenko's time to help Putin's victims on flight MH17. There are literally hundreds of Bushmaster and Hawkeye armoured vehicles that would be much better in action here than rusting in depots in Australia, and the fact that our Australian embassy still has not returned to Kiev, along with some 70 others, makes us look like cowards. If the horrors that have befallen Ukraine are not to be repeated elsewhere, all the leading democracies, including Australia, need to rethink what it means to be secure, and to remember that other countries won't leave us in peace because they like us, but because the alternative simply is not worth it. After all, countries are not protected by wishful thinking, but by military strength, and alliances don't flourish through goodwill, but through a willingness to fight. So, my friends, we owe it to the Ukrainians to help them to keep their country, but even more, we owe it to ourselves to heed this wake-up call and to win this new civilizational struggle against those wanting a darker world where only might is right. Thank you very much. Again, I pledge whatever I can personally do to help this heroic country to keep its freedom. Slava Ukraina.
Surprisingly good turn.
Thank you so much, Mr. Prime Minister. Thank you, all of you, for being here at 9 in the morning on a Saturday. This is it's perhaps even more heroic than your heroism of having come here in the middle of a war, is being up at 9 in the morning on a Saturday. I want to thank, first of all, the organizers, especially my friend Monsieur Alexei Goncharenko and Alisa Liptuga, for having us, and I'm grateful to this wonderful August panel of my colleagues and friends who are going to tell us about food security. and food insecurity. I must confess, I've always despised the term food security. We're talking about hunger. We're talking about starvation, right? This is the technical term, food security, and this is the terminology we use, but I never liked it. I am from here. This is my Ukrainian hometown. I love this city very much. I wrote my first book about it, and it's a fascinating city. It's also the most important city on the Black Sea, Basin. Has 3 deep water ports, in case anyone doesn't know this. These ports account for, by far, certainly in peace times, this is the case, the majority of the export of this country. We're going to talk about grain, we're going to talk about other things, but there are obviously not many things being exported from these ports other than grain and rapeseed at the moment, for technical reasons having to do with the deal that is on the table. But before we get down to the technical stuff, I want to remind everybody that this is a country that is post-genocidal. This is a country that 90 years ago experienced man-made famine. This is a country of people whose great-grandparents lived with hunger, and a country where, depending on what the statistics are now, I haven't read the latest research, between 5.9 million and 9 million people starved to death. It's probably closer to 7. The Robert Conquest numbers have been changed. I'm not a historian, but millions and millions and millions of Ukrainians starved to death in a man-made famine, right? So this is the basic pretext and predicate for any conversation about food security in a country that ordinarily left to its own devices and in peacetime can provide hundreds of millions of people with their daily bread, their calories, now has something like 6 or 7 million people who are food insecure, right? 7.5, thank you. So I think we're going to start with preliminary remarks by Ambassador Cindy McCain, who's the executive director of the UN World Food Program, right? So whoever is in charge of the technical stuff, please roll, Miss McCain.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for asking me to take part in the Black Sea Security Forum. Ukraine is a global breadbasket, so the impacts of the war have been felt far beyond your borders, as disruption to exports of wheat and grains have increased food prices and stoked global food security. At the World Food Program, we understand that safe and functioning Black Sea ports are vital gateways to a world free from hunger. Since the Grain from Ukraine initiative was launched, we've received almost 1 million metric tons of wheat and other grains to help us feed the people in greatest need. Most recently, a WFP ship left Ukraine with 25,000 metric tons of wheat for our operation in Nigeria. In the coming weeks, there will be another vessel taking wheat bound for Yemen. I want to thank the people and the government of Ukraine for your great generosity at a time when you face such severe challenges at home. You are a strong and reliable partner for WFP, and we're proud to work with you to ensure that food cultivated by Ukrainian farmers can reach those most in need. As humanitarian needs rise, Grain from Ukraine offers a beacon of hope for hungry people around the world. Thank you, and I wish you a successful summit. Okay.
One more thing before I introduce the acting Minister of Agrarian Policy of Ukraine. Just in case anyone doesn't remember what happened on the 27th of February, 3 days after the start of the full-scale Russian invasion, our Turkish allies closed the straits. Everyone remembers this, right? No new warships were allowed into the Black Sea of Russia or of allied navies. So basically, only now that there is no Ukrainian fleet, although that didn't stop Ukraine from destroying a third of the Russian fleet, the Black Sea fleet, the only countries that have assets in the Black Sea are Romania, Turkey, Russia, and Bulgaria, right? It's important to remember that the Russians tried to blockade this port. And when we speak about the Odesa port, we're talking about the three Black Sea ports, which are within 40 kilometers from where we're sitting right now. They blockaded the ports, and they tried to create an artificial famine in Africa and in parts of Southeast Asia and in the Middle East. That blockade has been broken by Ukrainian ingenuity and the Ukrainian Air Force and the Ukrainian Army. And under the command of Rear Admiral Nishpapa, the Ukrainian Navy, what's left of it, was able to break the blockade. So we do have now egress of the exports, and the price of grain on international markets is more or less back to normal. So those are just the very basics in case anyone missed that, and I'd like to have some preliminary comments from Minister of Agrarian Policy, Taras Vysotskyi. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, dear participants of the Black Sea Security Forum. Thank you for the invitation and for organizers really to organize this event in Odesa. As the moderator said, Odesa is really very crucial for the international food security. As of now, due to the, first of all, military efforts, but as of now, 75% of Ukrainian agricultural products are exported through 3 Odesa Black Sea ports. And at this time, almost at this time, a year ago, it was, after the end of grain corridor, almost zero. So it's really also some military miracle, and it's really very important. Why is so important? Because Ukraine indeed is one of the biggest exporters of different kinds of agricultural products in the world. The basic calculations made by calories showed that up to 400 million people could be fed with the food exported from Ukraine, like in 2021, when we had the biggest harvest and when we were able to have great export. Unfortunately, but we are sure that it is temporary, so far 20% of Ukrainian agricultural arable land aren't available for Ukrainian farmers because they are temporarily occupied. And that means that our export and the possibilities to support the people throughout the world are at least 20% less. Because Ukraine is an export-oriented country in terms of agriculture, and usually about 65–70% of what we produce is exported. That means that this forced decrease of production due to the temporary occupation means decrease of export of Ukrainian food to the countries that need it. Despite of it, Ukrainian farmers keep operating also during these years of full-scale invasion. Actually, even last year, not by volume, but by yield per hectare, we had some record results in the history of Ukraine. And because of it, it's possible to export quite a lot of products to the said countries. Our preliminary forecast and calculations show that next marketing year, which in agriculture starts in July, we will be able once again to export more than 60 million tons of different kinds of agricultural commodities and products. And that's once again, first of all, will be possible due to the availability of Odesa Black Sea ports for this export. Because we can easily calculate that it's at least 5 million tons per month. And all of the efforts which were taken showed that it is impossible without Odesa Black Sea ports. At the months May, June 2022, when lots of efforts were done to develop the Danube region and European solidarity lines, still the maximum results could be 3.5 million tons per month without Odesa Black Sea ports. So it's really very, very crucial for the Ukraine and for the Ukrainian agricultural sector and victory to have this region operating. And that's once again important to have this event today. Also, I would like to thank you, World Food Program, for the constant cooperation. Indeed, as Ms. Ambassador said, it's more than 1 million tons in general, but also we have a new initiative organized and realized with World Food Program as Grain from Ukraine. And within this initiative, also more than 200,000 tons already were shipped to another countries. And it's keep going. As we discussed this morning, new donors keep supporting, and it's very important that Ukrainian food will be delivered to the people who really desperate and need it in different regions, including Africa and Middle East. So, at the end, a few words about internal food security. Indeed, in most cases, by volumes, we can produce enough to feed the Ukrainians, but due to lots of people have been forced to move, to leave their homes, and inside of the country or outside, their economic possibilities are not always the ones who can afford all of this food. That's why we keep realizing also initiatives to support internally people together with World Food Program, and really these people who were forced to keep receiving the necessary nutrition until they will be able to return to their homes and really return to their normal lives. So we would be glad to hear your also ideas and comments and thoughts in this respect, and we'll keep working together to ensure the internal food security and ensure that Ukraine keeps guaranteeing the world food security. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. That was succinct and smart and useful. I think I just heard the air alarm is going off, right? Again, this is par of the course. This is normal. Well, there's nothing normal about it, abnormal life. But whenever we have a gathering in Ukraine of important and valued guests, the Russian aggressors always like to remind everyone here that this is how they make us live, how they make Ukrainians live. There's nothing surprising about that. This city has been under assault for 2 years, and for a year, ever since the deal collapsed. Actually, well, the Russians pulled out of a deal, and the Ukrainians broke the blockade. They began destroying infrastructure in the city. Grain silos, grain elevators, shipping containers. They've systematically tried to destroy the infrastructure of bringing food from the fields of Ukraine to the plates of people all over the world, from Africa to the Middle East to Southeast Asia. Speaking of which, I'd like to have the country director, my fellow American, Marianne Ward, tell us a little bit about food insecurity here.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. I want to echo some of the words of Minister Taras. Indeed, the world needs Ukraine's food. Without Ukraine's food, And without that food coming out through the Odesa ports, the world will be hungry. I want us to go back to remember what happened after February 22. The ports were closed. And as a result of the ports being closed, the grain future prices went up by 35%. So suddenly, bread in Europe, wheat, flour, and bread all through the Middle East and Africa shot up for every citizen. And by our calculation, that meant that 40 million people, just in those 3 months, fell into hunger. We won't use food security, we'll use hunger. But 40 million people, just like that. And of course, that's a huge concern for us as World Food Program, giving our humanitarian mandate and to provide assistance to those people. But it's also a geopolitical problem because, in essence, if Africa, East Africa, West Africa, Northern Africa, and the Middle East cannot feed themselves, we're going to have some very serious geopolitical problems. You would see Egypt, Lebanon potentially fall. And I don't think the world can afford that. I don't think anybody can afford that. So from a global standpoint, we need the food and we need the ports. Also, just to be a little bit selfish from a WFP standpoint, we very much advocate for keeping the ports open and keeping Ukrainian foodstuffs and its grain. So it's wheat, it's maize, it's oil, it's peas and legumes. All of those food items are absolutely critical for the world. So we feed approximately 100 million people annually, some of that food coming from Ukraine. In fact, 20% of our procurement globally last year came from Ukraine, even during wartime. So during the war, we have continued to export, as Cindy McCain mentioned, 1 million tons and growing. We have another vessel next week. We have another vessel later in July. We have another vessel in August. We continue to try to work to take the benefit of the hard work of Ukrainians farmers to the world. And then I would just like to say that the Ukrainian Alternative Corridor has been a critical win for global food security. In essence, the effort to ensure that those, what was the number, 1,800 vessels can continue to go and feed the world has been a boon to global food security, and indeed wheat prices are at a very normal rate. But it also means that it's a long game relationship for WFP with, Ukraine, the grain, the ports. We have been working very hard to buy food for Ukrainians in Ukraine, and as a result, we have deepened our relationship with different suppliers. It's very important to us that there's a variety of suppliers that can export, and if a supplier can work with WFP and meet our requirements in terms of what we put into our food boxes for Ukrainians, or we export, it means they can also meet the requirements for export to the European Union. So we have a team of food safety and quality experts who are working with a variety of suppliers. I'm actually really excited because earlier this week, a Ukrainian oil supplier for the first time won an international tender. So more and more suppliers from Ukraine are winning WFP's tenders. I'm very proud that we are the technical implementing partner of Grain from Ukraine, this incredibly generous initiative of President Zelensky to provide food to the world and to the countries that need it at a time when Ukraine is under existential threat. I mean, that is an incredibly generous initiative, and we are incredibly proud to be part of it. We've 24 donors have come to the table to pay for us to buy Ukrainian food products and export them, and it has benefited 10 million people. Now, I'm going to make sure I don't miss any countries, because it has thus far gone to Somalia, Yemen, Kenya, Sudan, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Djibouti, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Malawi, Mozambique, Mauritania, and Gaza. So Ukrainian grain is going through WFP programs to those who most need it in those locations, and that is, again, a demonstration of the resilience of Ukraine's agricultural sector, and I would say Ukraine's desire to assist the world. I guess my final point I wanted to make is how important to the Ukrainian economy the agricultural sector, and I would say the logistics linked to agriculture, is as well. It's 10% of the GDP, but it's nearly 20% of employment in this country. So any support to the agrarian sector is incredibly important for the economy, so it's a win for Ukraine, but it's also a win for the world. So any investment in keeping grain flowing, the logistics functioning, is what has to be done. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Next, I'd like to turn to the charge d'affaires of the EU delegation, Monsieur Rémi Duflot, who's been coming here, I think, for 30 years. You've been here a very long time, and you have tremendous You've been coming here many times, even before you were in your current position, and you have tremendous experience of Odesa. So. I'd like you to talk a little bit about the quarter and what the EU delegation is focusing on.
Thank you, Vlad. Good morning, everyone, and thank you also for being here. It's not an easy trip to come to Ukraine, so thank you for this act of support. As far as we're concerned here, most of us are living here, so we appreciate it all the more. Vlad, you mentioned the Golodomor. I want also to say and to remind to all of us that in 1848, 49, 50, this country was the one who saved a big part of Western Europe from hunger. And Odesa actually played a major role in that story. And so the question is, what happened? When Holodomor happened, I think the cause for trouble was known. When this war is happening, we know what is the cause for trouble. And therefore, this has this realization that Russia is the source of these difficulties has, of course, been a determining factor in defining the EU response to it. Black Sea region is already in itself not an easy one. It's a complicated region, and the management of the sea itself is not easy. And of course, the war has only made things worse. So it was clear from day one, I think, that Russia was intent on deliberately weaponizing food as part of its war tactics. And this has, of course, as recalled by my colleague here, jeopardized the global food security immediately. The effect, you're right, was absolutely immediate and very visible and huge. And of course, as Vlad said, sorry, I have to quote the previous speakers already, because number 3 or 4, it's already a lot of good things said. As Vlad said, I mean, that was naval blockade, the occupation of the ports, but also don't forget that Russia stole Ukraine grain. Don't forget that it destroyed grain port storage infrastructure. Don't forget that landmines also have been a major problem for production. And I want actually to share with you a thought for the families of those, a thought of compassion for the family of those who have died in the fields to produce grain, that then we have helped export. And this is where the significance of helping Ukraine export its grain is actually, I would say, double-sided. It's to avoid and to prevent hunger in the world. It's also to help those who produce. And otherwise, without the immediate support we try to lend to them, would have been in very serious jeopardy. Our response in the EU was, Taras mentioned them, to create the so-called solidarity lanes. What are they? In a situation where ports are blockaded, in a situation where the sea cannot be used, as before the war, to export grain, we try to work to develop other ways. Inland waterways, roads, train, and we actually very actively started doing that from a very small amount of throughput capacity. we very rapidly, I would say, reached this figure of 3 million tons, which is of course not enough, but compared to previous capacity was really remarkable. One of the strategies we had, for instance, was to create new border crossing points for passenger flows, so as to allow existing border crossing points, larger ones, to process trade flows more efficiently and quickly. The work that has been done on the solidarity lanes, even though now the sea route has been restored thanks to Ukraine's efforts, is not lost, because we have, in the context of EU accession of this country, to think about the future increased trade flows. And everything that has been done is an investment in the future, and although we are now at 3.5 million tons per month, we will continue investing into solidarity lanes because of the future, but also because we need to be prudent. The sea route remains vulnerable. It is, of course, a relatively more costly route than before, and it is a relatively less safe route than before because of the mines, the sea mines, that are infesting the Black Sea now, thanks to our good neighbor Russia. And to this point, I want really to congratulate and thank Romania and Bulgaria, our two dear member states, who together with Turkey have launched the mine countermeasure program precisely to detect and neutralize mines as much as possible in the Black Sea, making therefore freedom of navigation and safety of shipping greater by the day. It's a very important complement to the pushback against the Russian Navy and the recreation of the shipping corridor that Ukraine has achieved essentially by its own means. Together with this, I want, of course, to say that we remain committed to supporting Ukraine until victory. There is no doubt about it, that there will be victory, and it will be our joint victory. There is no doubt about it. And talking about internal food security, since you mentioned it, I wanted to refer briefly to our humanitarian support. We met recently with the Council of Churches, and one of the heads of the churches was saying, you know, it's quite remarkable that despite the war, despite the cruelty of this war, despite the atrocious nature of this war, not one man, I don't know whether this is perfectly true, but he was saying not one man has died of cold and not one man has died of hunger. And this is really thanks to the extraordinary humanitarian mobilization around this country. On the EU side, we have contributed near, I think, 1 billion euros, but figures don't say a lot. What counts is the result. Because we support Ukraine, we also support the Summit on Peace and the discussion that will take place in Switzerland later this week about the principles to restore peace in a lasting and just manner. And one of these principles, actually one of the first ones, is food security precisely. And we will be participating in those discussions very actively and will continue to be supportive. And also another way we will continue to be supportive is by helping Ukraine's defense industry to become part of the value chain of the European defense industry. So let me just add 2 words about this aspect, which is important for the future as well. Because restoration of the shipping corridor was possible thanks to naval drones, essentially, to anti-ship missiles, things that Ukraine didn't have at the beginning of the war. So it says a lot how innovation in weaponry can actually help food security as well in such situations like this one. So we will, as I said, after the adoption of the European Defence Industrial Strategy in March, we will make our links with the Ukrainian strategic defense industries stronger every month. I think we are going to have 4 or 5 defense forums every year. Ukraine has already organized 2 of them. We held one already in May, I think, in Brussels, and this will go on. And to help matchmaking as well, we will open soon a defense innovation office at the EU delegation, an office that will be manned by colleagues coming from Brussels. And we will also take the bet of living here together with us in Ukraine to help develop Ukraine's defense industry. In that area, I must say, we have things to maybe to teach Ukraine, but we have also a lot to learn from Ukraine and from the experience, the field experience of the war. I want also to say that there is, you remember the Black Sea Grain Initiative, this arrangement between the UN, Russia, Ukraine, and Turkey that was, I think, agreed in 2022, in July or June, launched somewhere at the end of August, I believe, 2022, and died in July 2023 because after lots of obstruction, Russia withdrew from it. And you know, I worked 4 years in the Donbass negotiations. That was exactly the same. Years of obstruction and finally withdrawal in the form of full-scale invasion. So nothing new here. But what I want to say that is, if there are new initiatives under the UN, I guess, that may lead to freedom of navigation and safety of shipping, we will certainly, as the EU, support them. Thank you very much. I will stop here, but we'll be happy to take up questions if there are.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was excellent. Thank you for explaining some of the technical aspects of the Russians scuppering their own deal after doing all sorts of nasty things in order to keep the Ukrainians from exporting wheat. They made the joint investigations into the cargo of the ships in Turkey very difficult. They would make those tankers sit there for a week, sometimes 10 days, 2 weeks, sometimes waiting to be looked at. They did all sorts of things in order to keep the Ukrainians from exporting wheat and everything else that they were exporting to the world. And also, they used their position to capture more share of the world grain market at the time, right? They not only did they steal grain, as in actually take the farmers' hard-earned grain, take it back to Russia and re-export it from Russian ports into the international market, but they also used their advantage to take over more share of the international grain markets, right? It was all very, very, very nasty all the way down, right? I think everyone on the panel will agree with that. I also want to thank the Charge d'Affaires for underlining that it's not just Ukrainian soldiers who are paying with their blood at the front line for the safety of the grain. It's also Ukrainian farmers who, go out on a tractor, and sometimes the Russians will bomb those tractors for spite or for fun. Sometimes their tractor will hit a little bomblet that's in the middle of their field, or a little mine, right, that they didn't see, but the minesweeper didn't get to, right? Farmers have died in the field. People have died in the field cultivating the land, right? It's incredibly important to understand. The other thing that I was very grateful that you underlined is the lack of efficiency in the solidarity corridor. It was a good thing that we did it, but there's obviously there's no way that a truck or train or car can take out more grain than a 25,000 ton tanker can, right? So all the stuff politically that we're seeing in Poland, and it's a shame, and I say that personally, not as the moderator, but I think it's a shame that there's a lot of politics vis-a-vis the grain in Poland and other neighboring European countries. All that stuff, it only has something to do with like 5 or 7% of the exports, right? 5, yeah. The overland transport of the grain, this is a minuscule part of what we're exporting. It's mostly coming out of the ports and tankers. So I'd like to get to our last speaker, last but certainly not least, former Minister of Civil Society in the UK a gentleman who is an academic and comes out of business, and also is a philanthropist who has personally helped evacuate tens of thousands of Ukrainian women and children from the front lines. Now coming live from Oxford, Mr. Brooks Newmark.
Thank you. As Boris Johnson would say, Dober din, everybody. It's great to see such an amazing turnout this time in the morning. Usually when I speak at conferences, the 9 a.m. shift is known as the graveyard shift because nobody turns up, but it's good to see so many people here. I'd like to, I guess, thank three people. First of all, Alexei for organizing this event. And I know it's been a challenge given the other things going on, but it's been an amazing group of speakers that we've had yesterday and also today. I'd like to thank Lord Ashcroft for sponsoring this. He's always generous in sponsoring things. He even sponsored me when I was an MP. So thank you, Lord Ashcroft. And finally, the amazing job that the World Food Programme has done. They have done, they've been heroes in this war, and they've done an amazing job. The irony that I want to first address really is, if I can have that list in front of you there. The list here of all these names, unfortunately, are almost all countries that are still supporting Russia. And this is the problem. So the first challenge we have is the PR campaign. And the best advocate for PR is to get developing countries on our side. There's no point in us in the West lecturing these developing countries as to why they're supporting Russia. They must know, but they must know from other countries who are developing countries that the cause of the problem, the cause of the starvation in their country is Putin. And we should lay that squarely at his feet. The second challenge when it comes to food security is mines. And we need to address that. That is both sea mines, as been talked about here, but also land mines. And we have to do as much as possible to try and demine, and particularly demining the fields, which is an enormous challenge. And in the almost 2 years that I've been here, I probably know Ukraine now more than most Ukrainians, having pretty much covered the whole country several times over. And the guys who are doing the demining, again, are heroes. They're doing an amazing job. But again, the victims of this, unfortunately, are the farmers themselves, because the farmers are trying to provide the food which these countries need, and we should be doing more and more, I think, from certainly from my perspective, to investing in the technology needed to do the demining. And I particularly want to thank groups like the Halo Trust, who've done an amazing job, again, not just doing demining themselves, but teaching Ukrainians how to go about their demining. The third aspect and final aspect I want to talk about is ultimately Black Sea security comes from one key dynamic, which is doing everything possible to ensure that Ukraine retakes Crimea. Crimea is going to be the pivot, I think, in this war. It is existential both for Putin, but is also existential for Ukraine. In the absence of Ukraine retaking back Crimea, there will never, repeat, never be security in the Black Sea. Therefore, secure not just Ukraine itself for the future, but it'll secure the food supplies that we're talking here. And I think we need to enable Ukraine to have the weapons that it needs like the latest ATACMS, the M48, we need to persuade Scholz to allow Ukraine to use the Taurus missiles, because unless we can completely obliterate the links, like the Kerch Bridge and the two other links to Crimea, and isolate Crimea, that is the only opportunity Ukraine will have to ultimately retake Crimea back. So I think those are the 3 points that I want to make. Thank you again for letting me talk, and Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Crimea is absolutely the key to Black Sea security. There can be, as you said, no security in the Black Sea as long as the Russians control it. I want to get back to Acting Minister Vysotskyi. What is going to happen with grain prices this year? And can you just give us, like a 90-second version of forecast? What's going to happen on the grain markets and what Ukraine is doing?
Thank you for the question. If there'll be any man who can forecast the prices, it will be, I think, more richer than Elon Musk. So this is always the hardest topic. But what we really see that there has been changes. That after, usually in grain prices there are these waves, and after really the year of minimum prices, now we see that it is turning another way. That's also due to some reasons of some decrease of global grain production. Actually, that's also the reasons of this 20% of occupied Ukrainian territory, because you are right that Russians are stealing and selling and exporting, but they don't use any technologies. And so, for example, we use the satellite images to analyze what is the yield level at this territory. And it's in 2023, it was 2 times less than in 2021. So the world in general could receive more grain and more food from these occupied territories at the time Ukraine cultivated there, because technologies were there and investments were there. And currently they are just sowing and taking and stealing. So that's also influenced the global grain balance. And what's also important to understand that we are returning to a usual market cycle, because usually Ukraine has been very active on global markets from July till March. And then the other countries came. This year it was another way, because Ukrainian grain corridor opened from November, December, and we have been active till June, and are going to be active there another months. But that means that in spring, when we won't be able to be such actively presented in spring 2025 on the global markets as this year, there can be also influence on the prices. And also it should be taken into account that can create some deficit, and because it will be not impossible for Ukraine to be presented the whole year, once again because of 20% of territory occupied. And Russians unfortunately keep making this terrorism, because we can see some initiatives like import quotas and others, so they do understand still their importance in terms of volumes, and we should also get prepared for it, that Ukraine wasn't be able to be actively presented spring 2025, and if there are no big harvest in south, South Globe, there can be again problems created by Russians who can control from the capital the amounts of grain exported, including to Africa.
Got it. Thank you so much. Marianne, I thought I saw a glimmer of your eyes. You wanted to say something. And I'm also just curious to answer that political question. I never understand myself. I just don't. Why do the leaders of countries that are being starved to death by Russia support Russia in the UN Security Council and in various international forums and organizations. I just don't get it. I'm sorry. I don't know. Maybe I'm not smart enough. Tell me.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm not part of the political side of the UN, so I'm not an expert on these things. The General Assembly is a very dynamic place. I would agree with the point that it is also it's a hearts and minds campaign. So it is important to persuade member states that indeed it is their interest to have a stable global order. I think that's really what this is a part of, is a stable global order. And I mean, we've seen time and time again, I've worked for the World Food Program for 30 years, and when people are hungry, they either fight or they leave. And when they leave, they go to other countries that maybe aren't as well prepared to accept them. So hunger is a destabilizing factor for the global order. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can you, Mr. Newmark, can you tell us a little bit about what your philanthropy does?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So we started really evacuating people because at the beginning of the war, I noticed that a lot of people were charging people lots of money to get away from the war zones. So I decided to go in and do it for free. And so we began by evacuating people with buses that I brought in away from Kyiv early in the war, and then moved south towards Mariupol to move people away from there. But really, I spent about 6 months in Kharkiv, and all those villages early in the war that were being bombed, we ended up evacuating over 11,000 people from those villages alone early in the war. And we're a small team. There were just 5 of us, and it was hard to get the bus drivers there to begin with. So people who know me know that I'm crazy and a risk taker. So I said, well, I'm going, who's coming with me? And I managed to find 2 buses and 4 bus drivers. And we started moving people out at scale. There were lots of people out there, by the way, but moving people in 1s and 2s. But I decided to sort of scale up, and we worked with the local council, and I think working with local government is really important. We worked with the army to make sure where we were going was safe. And we began pulling people out of those villages. But then in August, in 22, basically the Ukrainian army pushed the Russians out of Kharkiv Oblast, took about 2,500 square kilometers back, and a lot of the people we pulled out went back to their villages, but they had no food, they had no clothing. So we sort of changed what we were doing, and so we started providing humanitarian aid. But yes, after about a year and a quarter, we moved about 35,000 women and children mainly from all those frontline villages.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for that. Before we get to the Q&A, just one... Sure.
I've one interesting anecdote. So early on, of course, one of the big problems was that people were worried when we were picking them up from the villages, we were going to take them to Russia. So I came up with this ingenious idea of charging them 10 grivny to come on our buses, which is about 10 cents or 10p. And I think most of the people thought even the Russians aren't crazy enough to charge us 10p to kidnap us and take us to Russia. So it gave them a sense of security.
And get the payment in hryvnia rather than rubles.
Yes,
so
exactly.
that's right. That's smart. Again, we're gonna take questions in 1 second. Just to give one last minute to Rémi. I personally would like to. You don't have to because you're a diplomat, but I'm personally would love to hear your thoughts on certain neighboring countries. Ungenerous, there's so much generosity on the panel, ungenerous behavior without naming particular countries. If you want to say something about our Ukraine's own year abroad in the European Union, where there is domestic politics over Ukrainian grain. But if you don't want to answer about being a diplomat, I understand. We'll just go straight to Q&A.
Thank you, Vlad, for putting me on the grill like this. Well, I can explain what happened. What happened was that just after the war started, the Commission, with the support of all member states, without exception, agreed to liberalize trade relations completely. That was, I think, the fastest trade liberation in world history. And this, of course, had some consequences on certain economic sectors, and those who suffered from those consequences organized themselves to express their suffering and their worry about, their concern about their future. But now it's sorted out. I think, of course, when we went through that period every day, it was very tragic, and there were new developments, and people were indignant, and this I understand. But at the end of the day, we have sorted it out. Diplomacy has worked. I don't say this because I'm a diplomat. I'm talking about internal EU diplomacy. It has worked, and here we are. And Ukraine has, I would say, has played ball. And it's all together that we came to a solution to that problem.
Okay, fair enough. Lady in the front in the blue. Get her mic, someone.
Hi, Trudy Rubin from the Philadelphia Inquirer newspaper. I'm curious if perhaps Minister Vysotskyi or any of you could describe why it was possible to set up the current grain corridor without international oversight when the former effort failed, when the UN was involved. What made it possible to do it now? Could it have been done before? What was the key? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Actually, a little bit it was discussed. It has been possible, first of all, due to the military actions and support. And actually, at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, Ukraine didn't have such military forces in the Black Sea. And after a year and a half, these military efforts were developed. But also we can't say that it happened without international support, because international support, international military support also participated in it. Air defense systems and others, it's still international support. So it was possible due to the military efforts, but joint military efforts, Ukrainian internal development and international military support. And it needed time. It wasn't available in July 2022. We needed time to develop it. Thank you.
Okay, that's a good question. We had a lady, another lady in blue, right over here. That's you.
Good morning. Stella Gervas. I am a historian of the Black Sea, University of California, Los Angeles. In the early 19th century, after the Napoleonic Wars, French, the Duc de Richelieu transformed Odessa into a thriving commercial port by establishing its status as a Porto Franco, a free port, and that facilitated its trade and economic growth. This strategic plan went together with urban planning and the development of the infrastructure by putting Odessa on the map as an international trade hub, not only in the Black Sea region, but beyond to the Mediterranean. So today, Odessa, as the rest of Ukraine, faces an essential challenge amidst a war with Russia. So my question is, how can we take some historical lessons from Richelieu's era in guiding us for some strategies, contemporary strategies, by bringing or helping Odessa to recover its status as an important trade hub in the region, or in other terms, what steps
Thank you so much.
can be taken to
That's good.
to put Odessa again on the map?
Good. That's a good question.
Thank you.
It's a broad question. There have been very briefly. There have been multiple ideas about turning Odessa into a Hong Kong or Singapore free trade zone on the Black Sea. This is not a new idea. We've been having these conversations since independence. But since Dr. Richelieu was mentioned, Rémi, do you want to say something?
Okay, thank you. Very comprehensive question. Well, I think when you are talking about restoring the splendor of Odessa, well, first of all, it's a splendid city to start with. Second, I was in the port yesterday, and of course, it's a place that is bombed regularly. You have repairs everywhere. So it's not the time now to, I would say, it's time to plan, but it's not realistic to expect this to happen now. So in terms of planning, of course, what has to be done is to think about a reconstruction plan for the city, for the port in particular. And this, I think, is part of the ground reconstruction plans that were discussed in Berlin earlier this week. What I want also to say is that to make a Port of Franco now, of course, would make no sense, because tax collection is the issue. That's key to finance the war effort. It's not the moment to forgive it for, I would say, regional reasons. So altogether, we see a picture where the situation now, in a way, functions as best as it can, thanks to the shipping corridor. It was not an individual Ukrainian-only solution, because it involves also the NATO countries that are on the western coast of the Black Sea, since the corridor actually goes through their territorial waters. And also, as I said, there is the mine countermeasures program involving Bulgaria, Romania, and Turkey. And also there is the, now since October last year, the European Maritime Security Strategy, which involves, in particular, implies the increasing our EU capabilities to detect, monitor mines, to increase situational awareness, not only for us, but also for Ukraine, of what happens in the waters of the Black Sea. So you see, that's the situation today. And for the future, of course, I would say everything is possible. Still working, as you know, at least at EU level and G7 level, on how to make best use and largest possible use of the Russian assets that are under sanction. And also, as I said, part of the solution in the long term is, of course, security commitments from our side towards Ukraine. This is coming. You heard the news a couple of days ago that there was an agreement with the US on security commitments. The same is going to happen soon with the EU, and many of our member states have already concluded such agreements. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for 3 or 4 more questions, depending on what the organizers tell me. We have a gentleman in the back with a mic, then that lady in the back, and then you've been holding your hand up. So let's take 1, 2, 3. Why don't we do speed round, and then we'll try to answer them. So, sir?
Thank you very much. Archie Hamilton, United Kingdom. I'd like to ask about sea mines. We were told that the Russians had placed many sea mines in the Black Sea, and some of these had broken free and were a threat to shipping. Since then, I've heard that only 2 have washed up on the shores of the Black Sea. And so what's happened? Was it much exaggerated, the number of sea mines that they'd laid in the beginning? Or has there been a great success in sweeping them and clearing the mines away?
I think the minister's going to have to answer that one.
So what I can quickly reply is that the ships who go through this corridor, they are full by militaries, and so far, and hope it will be the same in the future, there has been no accidents. So it's hard to calculate the overall number of them, but definitely the current military possibilities provide the possibility to really clean them on the route. So perhaps it also was more, the rumors were bigger than in reality, but so far it is possible to cover them. And since October previous year, we didn't have any accidents, and hopefully they're not going to happen. So no problems for the ships, at least so far.
I'd like to also add something to that. First of all, the Russians had access to coming very close to the land of Odesa region in March and April before the Ukrainians pushed them back. And we don't actually know what they were doing there. We don't exactly know where they put the mines. That's one thing. The Ukrainians also put mines down in order to keep Marines from landing in this region, right? So it's not just Russian mines, it's our mines, it's Ukrainian mines also. And the other thing is that, because the Russians have access to the Crimean military bases of Ukraine that they captured in 2014, they actually do have mines with Ukrainian serial numbers on them. So sometimes you find a mine, and it doesn't actually matter whose mine blows up your ship. And there have been, I know at least one case of an Odesan blown up as he was swimming. He was actually a IDP from internally displaced person from further up the Black Sea, either from Mariupol or Kherson. The poor gentleman took his family out and went swimming and was killed by a mine. And there may have been even other instances that I haven't heard about, but I personally remember someone being killed while they were swimming. So it's a very serious issue of the mines. Is there anyone else? We had that lady in the back. I told her I'd give a chance.
I think it's working. Thank you so much. I am Irina Zidaru. I'm a Director General for Strategic Affairs with the Romanian MFA. Thanks a lot to Alex Goncharenko for inviting me here. We have met 2 years ago in Constanța when the Helsinki Commission came. And I just wanted to say that the presence of Prime Minister Abbott here consolidates a say we have in Romania. What happens in the Black Sea does not stay in the Black Sea. And I will get to some figures, which are underlining what Romania did regarding grains and the Black Sea. First of all, 2 years. Since 2 years, Romania is providing safe transit for the Ukrainian grains towards the international markets. 40 million tons have been transited Romanian in this span of time. At the same time, 5 stakeholders gather together in Tulcea and in Galați every once in a while in order to see what supplementary infrastructure works are needed in order to further facilitate the transit of the Ukrainian grains. These stakeholders are Romania, Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova, the European Commission, DG Move precisely, and the United States. Thanks a lot to Ambassador Jim O'Brien for being with us in this respect. 3 stands for 3 allied riparian states, Romania, Bulgaria, and Turkey, which put together a mechanism in order to act for the debinding of the Black Sea, for helping everybody to get the merchandise towards other markets. And everything, it's standing for one gem. This gem is the rules-based international order, is the democracy, and it is only saying that things are exactly as this logo is, black and white. It's either you are supporting Ukraine or not. Against this a bit emotional background, I would like to ask the panelists, what would they recommend for the EU member states to do as quick as possible in order to support the European perspective of Ukraine and the Republic of Moldova, starting from this fundamental field of work, which is the agriculture. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. Thank you for giving us the Romanian perspective. That's great that we got that. Anyone want to answer that?
So, of course, we are thankful for all of this support. Indeed, all of the success of the new region wasn't be possible without the active participation of Romania and other countries. As for the quickest ones, once again, free trade agreement for Ukraine is very critical. We do have the 1-year prolongation with some quotas, and actually now it's the time for us to renegotiate the general association agreement and free trade agreement within it for the long-term perspective, not 1 year. That's the most important for Ukrainian agriculture in the short-term perspective, because once again, to keep investing in processing and production of different products, you need the rules no longer than 1 year. This is a great support, prolongation for 1 year, but it's also necessary to keep developing, to have more possibility to plan in advance. And lots of other steps, but we can have another more conference. What should we do, Ukraine and EU, in order to integrate? But it is an urgent need in order to keep developing different sectors of agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I offered that gentleman over there. Are we running late? Because the organizers were running a bit behind. But this guy will go, and then.
Thank you very much. Just a very short question, Stefan Meisser from the German Council on Foreign Relations in Berlin. I want to ask Minister Vysotskyi about the situation of labor force in the agricultural sector in Ukraine. How this very difficult issue is developing. What are your projections also with regard to the harvest, how it impacts already on the harvest, and how you want to deal with this in the future? Thank you.
Of course, the situation is challenging. It is challenging since spring 2022 because lots of manpower should be used in agriculture, starting with tractors and combines, and at the same time also this man should be in the military forces, so it's always hard compromise. But so far, we have been able to find it. So far, all of the territories have been planted, so we didn't have any territory not planted due to the lack of labor force in agriculture. As for the harvest, there was a government decision to prolong the current reservation of men for 3 more months. We have the procedure to reserve the employees. It will definitely cover the harvest period, and there are some changes in this reservation process, and we hope it will be able to find this very hard compromise. The situation will be challenging, but we should manage not to leave any crops in the fields. Thank you.
Yeah, it was good. Thank you. I think we have time for one more. I think I saw another hand. Where was it? All right. No. Last chance. Forever hold your peace. Okay. Thank you so much to our esteemed colleagues. Give them a great big hand of applause. And thank you again to Alexei for having us. And enjoy the rest of your coffee break.